to.
I forgot to record. Sorry, everybody.
Okay.
But I'm now recording.
I was getting ready to promote Tokyo Ever After, which was coming out in a couple months. And I needed to take some pictures for my social media. And so I ushered my children into a side room with the promise of watching, like, I think Daniel Tiger or something like that. And so I had like 30 minutes to take some photographs of myself holding up my new book. I painted the fingernails on one hand because that's all that would show in the photo. I ironed only the front of my shirt because, again, that was the only thing that was going to show. And of course, I was wearing sweatpants. I put some makeup on and I ironed just like what was going to show of my hair too. I flat ironed it. And I remember having this moment of like, why am I doing this? Like my kind of house is falling apart. The world feels like it's falling apart. Like, why do I feel like I need to project this image? And that really became the central question for Mika in real life, is like, what does it mean to fake a life and why would someone do it?
That's so interesting. And it's interesting to kind of follow her journey. And we were talking a lot about her trauma and how difficult it had been for her to move on from that. And how well you portrayed her anguish and her sadness over giving Penny up, and how kind of all that came back full circle, that it was very profound, or very, you were able to really portray Mika's grief, I guess, is what you would, how sad she was about everything.
Yeah, I definitely channeled a lot of my early motherhood days into this, and how much I loved my kids, and thinking even about like something happening to them or them not being able to be with them. It was definitely easy for me to kind of to step into Mika's shoes and discover that grief on her behalf. I also think it's, go ahead.
I think something just hit maybe, yeah. Unless somebody had something to say. Did somebody have something to say? Okay.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Carmen, too.
I think it's interesting what you mentioned about trauma. When I was writing this book, I consulted with an adoption therapist, and she mentioned, there is evidence that trauma leaves a chemical mark on a person, and that it's something that can be genetically passed down. And it doesn't mean that there's hopelessness there, but it does mean that it really changes a person on a fundamental level. And in the book, Mika really describes her trauma as, that the mind may forget, but the body always remembers.
I thought that was very interesting, you focusing on the body part of it versus the mind. But I felt like everything kind of stopped for her at that age. And then she just couldn't move on past it until everything started happening in the book.
Yeah, she was very much frozen in time. And I think it was a survival mechanism for her. If you stay still, you can't get hurt. There's less chance of you getting hurt. And she had taken a big risk, when she was younger, and she had told her mother, I'm not going to pursue this career that you want me to pursue. I'm going to pursue art. And she was, slapped down in a really big way. And she learned her lesson. And so it caused her to be stagnant for several years.
I definitely think so. I don't want to be the only one asking questions if other people have questions. So feel free to hop in and ask questions, and I'll ask if no one has any. Anybody?
I'll just make a quick comment. A question, I guess. I gave my mother-in-law, who lived in Tokyo for a couple of years, the Tokyo books. She absolutely loved them. I did not tell her they were YA. She still does not know, but she really enjoyed them. But I was wondering how that whole train ride of being picked by the Reese Book Club, I mean, when did that happen? And was that while you were writing, Mika? And how did that change kind of your writing journey?
It did happen while I was writing Mika. And so it was a really crazy time in my life that I don't remember very well because there was so much going on. I remember I got an email from my editor about 6 months before Tokyo Ever After came out saying that it had been chosen for the book club. And then I had to sit on it for that whole 6 months because it's a really big secret. I have never had my books reach so many people. And it's been really great to connect, especially with the Asian American community, in talking about, you know, what it means to be a yellow body in the United States and the Asian American experience. So it's been really wonderful. I always thought my experiences were isolated and unique, because I grew up in a mostly white community, and hearing other Asian Americans having the same or similar experiences has been really wonderful and heartening.
Something that has stuck with me, I loved Tokyo Ever After, as you know, and something that has stuck with me since I read that book was her experience when she got to Tokyo, and she comments, "This is the first time that I look around and everyone looks like me." And I just love that. And for some reason that has stayed with me. And I think, you know, it's helpful to try to understand those things when it's not something that, you know, I've had my own experience with, but it's just a good reminder. I try to kind of keep it with me and in many different situations. And I just appreciate both in this book and in those books, what a great job you do of you know, representing different people and what's happening with them in a way that I think gives, you know, helps me understand it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think in Tokyo Ever After, Izumi notes what a privilege it is to blend in.
Right.
And that was from my own childhood experiences. Like I said, I grew up in mostly white communities, so I had that experience of kind of sticking out like a sore thumb. But then I also had the experience of attending a mostly Japanese American church. And so I knew what it was like to kind of breathe and not stand out. And it was really, really wonderful to be with community in that way.
And I think it's just helpful to be reminded when that's not something that's really happened to me much, you know, and so it's a good reminder to kind of put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Yeah. Just to add to that, a little anecdotal story. I also remember as a young girl not being able to find dolls that looked like me. It's a little better now for Asian girls, but I remember desperately really wanted an Asian doll, a girl that looked like me. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I do think that just that they're beginning to have more discussions about that and trying to kind of remedy that. But I also thought that was an interesting point in your book about adoption, because I know when I was growing up and I knew people that had been adopted from other countries, there was no conversation about maintaining a cultural history for them or understanding their identity. And definitely it seems like there's been some progress, at least in understanding the importance of that. Would you agree?
Yeah, transracial adoption is definitely a theme within the book. And I think there has been some progress. But, you know, Mika notes at the beginning of the novel that she didn't think about the race of the parents when she placed Penny for adoption. And that was a mistake that she made. It was more important to her that they were financially stable and that Caroline, you know, represented what Mika thought was the ideal mother. You know, race and ethnicity are important and they're critical to a child's identity. I grew up in an era where it wasn't polite to talk about race. And so when I had incidences at school, I was told just to ignore that. And you can imagine what that does to a child. It makes them feel very small and very insignificant. And it shrank me in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. And hopefully, I agree, we're not there yet, but hopefully at least as we begin to acknowledge things, and I think that's why things like your books are wonderful, because I think they help people understand it in a like story way, not just saying, okay, this should happen, but instead understanding what happens to people when it happens. You know what I mean? Like being able to, I guess, put yourself in their shoes or understand better what their shoes would be like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much powerful when you connect with the character.
Yes.
And I think
even better way to say it.
You know, even if you aren't Japanese American, you can find some similarities, I'm sure, with Mika. I mean, she's she's a woman that's trying. She's a woman that doesn't feel like she's enough. I think a lot of women feel like they're enough, not enough a lot of the time. And so she really does have some universal experiences, baked into her character.
I think that's right. Does anybody else have anything they want to ask?
I had a question about the writing process, and if you knew how the arc was going to go from the beginning, or if that was something that just kind of organically happened as you were writing.
Yeah, I do plot usually, but I leave room for things to develop organically. So I always knew that it was going to be a story about mothers and daughters. I always knew that I was going to begin with the letter from Mika and end with a letter from Caroline. I saw that from the beginning, how they were going to bookend. One of the things that surprised me in the drafting of the novel was the Thomas-Mika relationship, because I hadn't originally intended them to have a romance. And as I started to write their conversations, I was like, it feels like there's something there. There's a little spark. And so it was one of those times where as an author, you kind of have to kind of let the characters lead you. And I felt a little nervous about it because I was like, does this feel right? Is this not right? So I started writing it, and it was. And, on the surface, Thomas and Mika don't have very much in common. He's very set in his career, but they share this really deep and abiding love for Penny. And then they eventually started, sharing stories about themselves and realized they, enjoyed each other's company. And so I was super surprised by that development. But I loved going with it. And it was something that stayed intact, that romance after I had written it, stayed intact throughout the revisions. And I just ended up deepening it even more.
Anybody else? I just don't want to feel like I'm the only one asking questions if y'all have questions. Lynette, do you have something?
I have a question. So Mika's mom, is she stereotypical Japanese mom, or was she based on a mom, a personal that you know personally, or was she like because she's very structured and strict, and I didn't know if that was like typical Japanese mom or of her time, or how did you write her?
So yeah, she's pretty severe and she's pretty emotionally withholding. I think, I want to stay away from stereotypes. She is a woman that's deeply unhappy with what's happened in her life, and that filters down to Mika. And I have met Japanese women like that. I have met, white women like that. And so she's not really based on anyone. When I thought about Hiromi and Mika's relationship, I wanted them to really have completely divergent paths. And so where Mika was very messy and unstructured and risky and self-deprecating, Hiromi was the complete opposite. And maybe I modeled that a little bit. I don't feel like I'm a severe mother, but I do feel as my own daughter begins to grow and develop her own personality that we have completely different personalities. And I think that's such an interesting thing to explore, how mothers and daughters can have these really complicated and fraught relationships, but still love each other. And that's kind of what I wanted to do, take, Hiromi and Mika on that journey.
In the vein of characters, I wanted to ask about Hana. Mm-hmm. She was my favorite character, and I want a friend like her. And I was wondering if she was based on someone that you knew, or if she was like your fairy godmother. We need to give Mika this one fabulous relationship.
Yeah, she is aspirational for sure, but she also is modeled after some of the friendships that I had in high school. So like Mika, I went to an alternative high school where folks didn't really expect much of us. And, that's where Mika meets Hana. And I think, they both found each other, similarities with each other. So I think Mika describes it as them being growing wayward branches from their family trees, and they're misfits, right? But in Mika, she finds really an unconditional love with Hana. And that was a deep need for Mika, because she didn't feel like she had that with her mother. She didn't have it with her mother. And yeah, so she definitely is based on some friendships that I had in high school. I can't go into too many details because we've sworn each other to secrecy. But yeah, I think some of my friends, if they read some of the things that Mika and Hana got up to, they'll recognize it.
I loved Hana as well. I thought she was wonderful. We were talking about her job that we didn't even know that was a job, to be an ASL interpreter at a concert.
Yeah.
How fun is that?
I watch a lot of like music videos while I'm getting ready to draft, or as for inspiration. And I was watching a live music video, and there was an ASL interpreter, and I was like, that's kind of amazing. And I liked it too, because it was so artistic, looking, and so creative in many ways. And I thought that would be a great vocation for Hana.
And she got to tour with Pearl Jam.
I know.
I was like, I want to go.
I feel like that was me kind of like trying to telegraph, like, if the book ever got made into a movie, like maybe I get to meet Pearl Jam.
Exactly. I was like, yay.
I had like some other scenes, maybe I'll put them up sometime when the book publishes, where they go, like they actually get to go, like Thomas and Mika go to a Pearl Jam concert, but it ended up getting cut. But yeah.
Yeah, that would be very fun. Eddie Vedder and you could just be there together. Does anybody else have any questions? I have a couple more, but I just don't want to get in anybody's way. I want to make sure everybody has time to talk. Well, I'm interested in publishing with two publishers. So Tokyo Ever After, those two stories were with Flatiron. And then this time around, you're with William Morrow. What's that been like, two different publishers?
It's been a little crazy as far as organizationally, but it's also been really nice because all of my young adult then is funneled through one publisher, and all of my adult is funneled through another publisher. They work similarly. So I had much of the same like PR and marketing experiences from one imprint to the other. And a lot of, I don't know, I mean, if you guys know this or not, but a lot of like editors and publicists and marketers jump houses. So sometimes they'll be like, oh, I was at, Flatiron beforehand and now I'm at William Morrow. So that's always kind of nice too.
That has been one of the most surprising things to me about getting more involved in the book world, is how much jumping there is. I mean, I always knew it happened a little because suddenly somebody would be emailing me from a different place. I'd be like, wait a minute, but there's just so much. And if you talk to people that have been around for very long at all, they've been at least 2 or 3 or 4, sometimes even publishing houses.
Yeah, I think it's really natural to for publicists and marketers to want to grow in their careers, and it's a small community, so it's not unusual. And I was surprised by that too when I started publishing. I remember with my first 2 books, which came out with Houghton Mifflin, which has been now acquired by Harper. I think I had like 2 or 3 publicists. So I got 2 or 3 before moving on.
I know, and then I just develop a relationship with somebody and I'm all excited and they're like, oh, I'm headed elsewhere. I'm like, oh, no. So yeah, it's interesting. But so you have found that they operate pretty similarly. That's interesting, because I feel like every group or every publishing house has such an identity. That's interesting that you haven't found it to be too different.
With William Morrow and Flatiron, they do have their unique identities, but they also publish a pretty wide range of books. William Morrow, of course, doesn't publish young adult, but Flatiron within young adult, they publish anything from fantasy to contemporary to thrillers. So I haven't really felt that anything with like genre, like any constricted by genre with changing publishing houses.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your cover. I was curious with the purple and yellow, like if there was any significance to that, or if they were just the colors they came up with. It's striking.
Mm-hmm. I really love the cover. This is one of the one of the covers that I've looked at and been like, yes, this is it. This is Mika in real life. This is the cover for it. And actually, there is no significance to the yellow and the purple. It was merely preference. I was given 3 options. I think there was yellow and turquoise, and maybe yellow and orange. And we all kind of agreed that the yellow and purple was a little bit more striking and a little bit more unusual, that we didn't see a lot of purple on book covers.
And it's like she's stepping into the light. I like that. You know, she's kind of coming from where she's been covered up, and hidden is probably the wrong word, but sort of, you know, hiding. And then she's stepping into the light. And I think the yellow is very emblematic of that.
I always love a cover, you know, touching on what you just said, that kind of, not only does it have is a great cover, it's aesthetically appealing, but it also has that kind of layer underneath where it touches on one of the thematics in the books. And I think this cover nailed it. Yeah.
Well, I know we talked a lot about that with your Tokyo Ever After cover and trying to get it right. And then the process they went through and how it's turned out so beautiful. So I was happy to see that this one did too.
Me too, yeah.
Anybody else have any other questions? So are you going to go back and forth with YA and adult, or do you have a plan? Are you going to be trying to come out with several books a year? Are you going to make yourself completely crazy?
Yes, to all of it. Yeah, I am in a good place writing wise. My kids are getting older, so I feel much more able to write and to spend that time with my work. There's definitely more plans for women's fiction, and I'm starting on a new young adult novel that centers around a really great friendship group. I think that I've kind of subconsciously planted really great friendship groups in Tokyo Ever After, and then in Mika in real life. And so I feel like I'm telling myself something here, that I need to write maybe something from a multiple POV.
Do you have a set process for writing? I know we said that you plot it out and then you write, but do you write a certain amount a day? Do you write at a certain time a day, or do you just write when you have the time?
Yeah, I always start with an outline and, you know, character arcs. Like I want to know where my characters are going to start and where they're going to end. And so once I have an outline nailed down, it's time to draft for me. So I will sit down and I'll write 6 to 8 hours a day. And usually I divide it up into chunks. So I write around 500 words an hour. And so as soon as I hit that 500 words in an hour, I can like take a break. So it's also motivational for me. And so I average around like 10,000 words a week. And that brings me to a rough draft at about 8 to 12 weeks. You know, pending life events happening, you know, sick kids, whatever happens. And it sounds like a very short time, but then I spend about a year revising the book. So I'll go through around 4 to 5 drafts before getting a complete draft that I'm ready to submit to my agent.
So you really do work with it, live with it. Do you feel like that kind of continuing to revise, that sometimes, you know, you'll be on a walk or you'll be asleep or something and you'll be like, oh, this is exactly what I need to do now? Does that kind of happen as you're sitting with it over time?
Yeah, that is almost exactly what happens. I also start, when I'm in the initial stages of thinking about a novel, I take copious notes on my iPhone. And then when I'm ready, when I have an outline, I dump all of those notes into the outline, like it's scenes, it's snippets of dialogue. And then, you know, there's always problems that you encounter as you're drafting a novel. So for example, in Mika in real life, I had a very difficult time with Leaf and Mika's relationship. And I kept leaving it. Like I had him in the beginning of the book, and that's part of her plan in creating this great life. And then I kind of dropped him. And I knew, and I was like, I have to resolve this relationship, but I didn't know how to. And so it's something that I had to kind of leave on the table. And I don't think that I resolved the relationship until probably the very final draft. Like it came to me like, this is who they are in their relationships. This is what happened, and this is how they can reconcile. So that scene at the end where they meet at the grocery store, that was one of the very last things to go into the book.
We were talking about favorite side characters, and he was several people's.
Yeah. I know, I loved him. And maybe that's why I had such trouble kind of figuring them out, because I wanted to maintain him. And I think the conclusion that I came to, that really the dissolution of their relationship was Mika's fault. I mean, Leif decided to go off and follow his dreams, and I think she really resented him for that. And so she, fired back at him. She used, the marijuana seeds as kind of a cover. And then she kind of fired back at him and told him that what he was doing was silly and was dumb, much like what her own mother had done to her. And yeah, I love Leif. I always pictured him too as like a Chris Hemsworth character, like as a Thor, as like,
yeah, let's just say Thor. Yeah. That's great. I will forever now think of him that way. Yeah. Do you think about casting anybody else? Like who do you think of any of the other characters that way?
I was actually just talking to my publicist about this, because it's come up in some other interviews and press, and I'm like horribly bad at this, partly because I'm kind of suspicious. Like I don't want to put it out into the universe and not have it happen. But she suggested Paul Rudd as Thomas. I think mostly because he has green eyes. Yeah. Yeah. And that was interesting to me. It made me kind of stop and think.
I love Paul Rudd.
I do too.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. How about Mika?
Gosh, that is all. Main characters are tough. I mean, I've been asked that one about Azumi from Tokyo Ever After. And I don't know, a new talent, maybe a new actor.
That's always nice too, because then people don't have preconceived notions. They just come in and learn about this person as they're starring in your movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just had one more quick question. Have you read the new Jamie Ford? Because that does, the whole theme is the scientific DNA ancestry issue.
What is the title of it?
The Many Daughters of A Fong Moy.
No, but I just saw it come up on a list, and I checked it. I put it in my TBR pile.
It's phenomenal. And it's like maybe 7 generations of Chinese women. One of them is the first one to be in the United States, and it's based on a real woman. But the tie-in with Mika and that trauma passing down into generations, this one obviously much more contemporary. Yeah. I just thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, I'll move it up to the top of my pile, definitely. Thank you.
I think you'll love it.
Yeah, I love a good recommendation, so thank you.
Well, on that note, what is on your bedside table or wherever it is you read these days?
I'm ashamed to admit that I'm not reading as much as I should. I just read, I was asked to blurb a new young adult novel by Talia Hibbert. I might be butchering her name, but she's written some adult romances before. And I absolutely loved this book. It's called Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute. And so if you like a good light YA rom-com, it's really wonderful. She's a really clever writer, and her dialogue is so sparky. It was a great read. I'll have to look up and see when it's coming out, but I think it's coming out in the next few months.
Do you get asked to blurb a lot?
I do on the young adult side. I haven't, the only other adult novel that I have blurbed is, it was a book by a Nigerian author called Yinka, Where Is Your Husband?
Oh yeah, I love that book.
Yeah. And I got to read that one early, and that was a great read.
Talk about a great cover too. Talk about a cover that like ties into the story like yours does, where all the women are in her, I thought that was just very, very well done.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I don't know if you get to see very many UK covers, but they did something totally different for the UK cover. And that's similar to Mika. They did something totally different for Mika in real life in the UK. So
they did? What does your UK cover look like?
It's mostly yellow, and then there's a coffee cup, and then there's a profile of a woman on the coffee cup. And they really wanted to evoke like the messiness and of Mika's life, and also kind of like the coffee phenomenon with the millennial generation, I guess.
That's funny. Well, the other issue I thought was really interesting was Mika trying to negotiate the idea of suddenly becoming a mom, or whatever her relationship with Penny was going to be, you know, that she had given birth to her, had given her up for adoption, and now she's coming back, you know, when Penny's 16, and what that's going to look like, and how she's going to find her place. Was it hard to figure all of that out?
You know, I always knew that Mika was going to have, like, you know, she suppressed that love for Penny for many years. And so when Penny re-enters her life, it's very explosive for Mika. And it causes Mika to reflect a lot on her own relationship with Hiromi, her mother. And she decides more to take like a friendship route with Penny, very opposite than the relationship she has with her mother. And it doesn't work, you know, it doesn't work. It's a fine line she's walking, where she wants to parent and she's trying to be a friend. And she's also lying to her daughter, which, you know, and it all kind of comes to a very crushing halt for Mika. And then she needs to kind of figure out who she is as a mother, but more importantly, you know, who she is just in life in general. You know, she doesn't have a grasp on her own identity.
But I think it's difficult, you know, you haven't had the first 16 years with somebody. So you come in and you're trying to figure out, okay, you know, how do I build this relationship? What should it look like? And then Penny is a smart 16-year-old and she's like, don't tell my dad. And don't, you know, and so Mika's kind of put in all these positions where not only is she trying to figure out herself, but she's trying to figure out, what should my role look like now?
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, in the beginning, their relationship is pretty tenuous and they're feeling each other out. And then they kind of both jump in with both feet, right? Like they're all of a sudden like they're best friends and they have this great love affair, and it's all built on this lie that Mika's told. And so when the lie is exposed, it really makes them take that like step back and again, and go a little bit slower this time, right? In the second half of the book, they go slower and they're more realistic too about the relationship. Penny is, you know, 17 and Mika has missed those 17 years. And those are things that that's time you can't get back.
Right. And in addition to time you can't get back, it's a hard time to step into a teenager's life. You know, you're coming in at a kind of, there's just a lot happening. They're very emotional off and on. And, you know, it's just kind of an interesting time to step into a daughter's life, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about the format in terms of doing the adoption letter and then the letter from Caroline every year? That was an interesting format and I liked it, and how they were kind of throughout the book. How did that always happen, or was that something you added in? I know you said you had the opening and the closing set, but what about the middle?
So the letters between Caroline and Mika were always part of the novel. I really wanted to make sure that Caroline had a voice and was heard. But Thomas's letters came later. As I was kind of feeling out Thomas and Mika's relationship, I decided that it would be nice to include some letters from Thomas to really give that contrast of, you know, how Caroline related to Mika, you know, the biological mom, and how Thomas did. And he did it from, you know, he was very succinct in his letters and wasn't as warm as Caroline was. And he did it from a place of unknowing. He didn't understand that that these letters were so meaningful to Mika. And the very last letter that Thomas writes, where he kind of makes up for it, was another add-in towards the end of drafting. So as I was going through and feeling out their relationship, I really wanted them to have like a pivotal moment. So it seemed really right that Thomas should write something to Mika and explain his actions and his feelings. I think there's something so unique about writing letters. It's something we don't see very often anymore. You have to be really purposeful with writing letters. It emphasizes a relationship and the importance of it. And I think in many ways it's kind of like creating an artifact, something that's going to last for a long time. Much more unique and personal, I think, than email.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that. I lost my mom in September.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we were going through and, packing some of their stuff up, moving my dad, we found all of these beautiful letters that he had written her when they were in college. And I'd never seen them. And you're right. I mean, it's something they lasted forever. My mom had tied them into ribbon. It was this huge stack and we had the best time going through them. So you're right. It is something that's much more permanent than email.
There's something to that, right? Like holding something in your hands that someone else, someone you loved, has also held in their hands, right? That's pretty profound, I think.
And they're so tied to a particular time, whatever it is that the letter is about, kind of takes you back to that, or in this instance, he's able to express his feelings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody else?
Thought your sense of place was so good with Portland, and so can you talk a little bit about how you came up with placing it there and how you wrote about that?
And Dayton, I was so curious about how you chose Dayton. So that's a great question, Jada. Thank you. I'd forgotten to ask those.
So Dayton, I am afraid to admit, so I'm sorry if any of you live in Dayton. I was like, I just wanted to choose, on the surface, I've never been to Dayton. I did a little bit of research, but somewhere that felt kind of boring, like kind of, midway, like just a little boring. And with Portland, I wanted it to be kind of the opposite of that. I grew up in Portland. There's a lot of people that drive around in cars with bumper stickers that say, "Keep Portland weird." And, I thought it was a perfect place for Mika and Hannah, who were these like two misfits, to be living in like this kind of misfit city. And yeah, it's definitely, Portland is its own character within the novel. A lot of the things that are cited within it are things that I did with my friends, like when Penny goes to the Clinton Street Theater to see the Rocky Horror Picture Show. That was something that I used to do with my friends. They go to Voodoo Donuts, which is like a classic. It's like a Portland icon. Yeah, it was, as much as this was like a love letter to family and to second chances and healing, it was also a love letter to Portland too.
My best friend is from outside of Dayton, Centerville. So that's why I was just curious about Dayton, because you don't usually find it a lot in literature.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Well, anyone else? Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Amika. This was really wonderful. We thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And thank you for reading the book.
It was wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Oh yeah, I should get a photo. That's a great, thank you very much, Michelle. Well, I can't hold a book. Well,
I can hold up my
and I had an e-reader.
Anybody that has theirs. Yeah, I know a lot of times we don't have it. I'm going to try to quickly then take a photo. What is it? Command 3? Is that what it is? No, Control 3. What is it that does the, it's, okay, sorry guys, give me 2 seconds. I can't remember. Shift Command 3. Yeah, it's Shift Command 3. Okay, I don't think I can hold my book and do Shift Command 3, but I'm gonna try. Okay, there we go. All right, great. I will share that with everybody. So thank y'all again. I'm so glad everybody was here. It's good to see everybody's faces.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good luck with the launch.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.